COVID-19 pandemic is something that's unprecedented in all of our lifetimes, and I think at this point there's over 34 million people that have been infected, over 1 million people that have died globally. And so I think one of the big things that we're all trying to solve is how do we get out of this? And what we're really hoping for is to be able to understand what the normal immune response to the virus looks like. Is it productive? Is it long-lasting?
So the immune system protects us against infections, and for some infections we know that we have extremely long protection after we have contracted the disease for the first time. For coronaviruses in general, our knowledge was from prior infections, it was estimated that MERS coronavirus gives us about a year of immunity, and for SARS-1 the thoughts were more like 3 to 6 years. But now actually data are showing that people who have had SARS coronavirus 1 are still immune 17 years out.
Now, our study is really designed to look at antibodies, which are one of the key parts of the immune response. And so we set up a large-scale study to look at people around Pima County and around Arizona to see how well those antibodies are working to protect against infection. So what we were really looking for is, first of all, can we accurately identify people who have been infected at some point in the past by the virus? And so what we really wanted to make sure is that we have a very accurate test. We definitely don't want to tell someone that they're positive, that they have antibodies when they don't. So what we did is we started measuring antibodies to 2 different parts of the virus. And we had to measure antibodies to both of those 2 parts, the 2 independent parts of the virus, for us to say, yes, you're positive and you have antibodies.
So we've correlated, and we found that at a very high level we have exceptionally good protection.
What we found is that everyone who had been confirmed to have been infected by the virus, even people who had no symptoms whatsoever, made a really nice antibody response. And they all made antibodies that kept the virus from infecting cells. What we also found is that everyone maintains those antibodies for as long as we've been able to look.
We cannot really put a solid number on how long this immunity is going to last. What we know is what we have measured, which is like that it is at least 6 to 7 months.
Hello everyone, Dr. Sunil Dand, internal medicine physician. There's one thing that has really baffled me over the last year, and that is why it's become taboo to talk about natural antibodies to COVID-19 after recovering from illness. And I really don't get it, because this is basic science stuff. It's literally elementary school teaching here. And I've watched the reactions of some doctors and scientists when they're asked about this on TV shows and online shows, and they almost become stone-faced, like it's a no-go area. I do not get it. People want to know, obviously, how long they're protected for after a natural recovery, and if or when they even need the vaccine. I'm not aware of a vaccine for any illness which will ever give you better and more long-term immunity than actually recovering from the illness yourself and having your own antibodies. So that's something to think about in this whole debate. If you don't have immunity after a natural recovery for anything longer than 3 months, then a vaccine is probably not going to be any better than that. That's my understanding. I'm a doctor and therefore a de facto scientist. I'm all about rational, logical debate. If you know any differently or have any science to the contrary, please feel free to comment down below. Given that, then, are there any other options available out there? I believe there is a really big one which is underutilized right now. Hardly anyone does it. And that is to simply have your antibodies tested. You can go to any clinic, you can go to your doctor and request an IgG antibody test. And if you already have antibodies for COVID-19 infection, then you very unlikely need the vaccine. As per my understanding, again, of how we usually practice medicine in my clinic, we are always testing antibodies for various illnesses like measles, mumps, rubella, varicella, hepatitis B. And if people already have antibodies, then we never give them the vaccine. So I'm not sure why it would change this time. And if I can use the analogy of, it's a bit like saying, your nuclear bunker has failed, here's a tent instead. Your nuclear bunker are your natural antibodies, and if you already have them, then the vaccine is not going to do any more for you than that. I would really recommend that you consider, if you've recovered from COVID-19, getting the antibody test, having a discussion with your doctor, taking it from there. And this is more of a priority for high-risk groups, like I said. I do want to stress that I'm not some lone voice here in the wilderness shouting out this message. Over the last few weeks even, we've had multiple authorities and prominent figures in medicine and science raise this issue. And in fact, just last week, an article was published in Nature, one of the premier science journals, that stated if you'd had COVID, you likely had long-lasting immunity. And I have also talked about previously how the subject of natural antibodies has become taboo over the last year, and I'm not sure why. It's basic science and biology. You recover from an infection, in this case a viral infection, and you will develop some of your own antibodies. And that doesn't mean that you want to get the infection or you deliberately seek out to get it, but it's a simple fact. To deny that is almost science denialism. Some people say, well, the vaccine may provide you better protection than natural antibodies against the newer strains and variants. The vaccines that we're using now were all designed against the initial strain of COVID. If new vaccines came out, whether that's in the next few months, a year, however long it takes for vaccines against the newer strains and variants to come out, then that would be a different discussion. But right now, the vaccines we're using are all against that initial strain. At least that's how they were designed.
You're, of course, sitting in a place which holds a lot of hope for all of us with the Oxford vaccine. So for everyone wants to know, I mean, the last we heard was end of the year. Do you think that that's reasonable to expect that all of us all over the world will have access to vaccines by the year end? And will that be, will that be the end of the coronavirus pandemic as we know it?
Well, I think the coronavirus pandemic will end naturally. It will settle, but it will end not by going away. It will end by becoming part of our lives, just like influenza, hopefully with a lower death toll than influenza. I think that it's a sort of virus to which it should be fairly easy to make a vaccine. So I think that there should be a vaccine in existence, certainly I'm thinking by the end of this summer, we should have proof that a vaccine works. I think so. I'm pretty confident of that. But then I don't know, even though I work on flu vaccines now, I don't have enough of a sense of the scale of the problem in terms of manufacture and distribution as to where it will go and how that will all pan out. But my own sort of hope for the vaccine is that it will be useful in protecting the vulnerable sectors of the population. Most of us, frankly, don't need to worry about coronavirus. But I think that what we can see from this virus is that in normal, healthy people who are not elderly and frail or don't have comorbidities, it's not anything to worry about, no more than we worry about flu. We don't wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I might get flu. We don't do that with flu. There is no reason we should do that with this coronavirus.
Thank you so much for throwing so much light on this very complex and something that we're all obsessed with right now. Thank you, Professor Gupta.
It's a pleasure.
I should also point out that our viewers will have noticed that we are sitting here unmasked. And I should point out that actually we are, in an interesting sense, a model of something that I believe is not on the public radar. So if I'm correct, you, Robert, have had COVID.
I've had COVID and I've been fully vaccinated with Moderna.
All right. Steve, you have been vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated with Moderna.
All right. I am unvaccinated, but I am on prophylactic ivermectin. And the data actually, shocking as this will be to some people, the data suggests that prophylactic ivermectin is something like 100% effective at preventing people from contracting COVID when taken properly. So aside from the risk that possibly the ivermectin I got wasn't real, and I have every reason to think it was, it certainly appears to be the genuine article. I believe that what we have here is a demonstration of a kind of composite herd immunity, where through 3 different routes, COVID, vaccine, and ivermectin, we are protected, and you are
That's fair.
doubly protected. So I would just say that for anybody who's enthusiastic about the vaccines, if you're unconvinced by what we have to say about the hazard of them, one thing to consider is that the way to get society to herd immunity and therefore drive COVID-19 to extinction, which ought to be our goal, the way to do it is to get people into this category one way or the other, whether that's through prophylaxis, whether it's through a vaccine, or whether it's because they've had COVID already.
Yeah, one could argue that if everybody just took ivermectin for a month worldwide, we would end the pandemic.
I'm Dr. Keith Bourne. Does anyone who's had COVID need the vaccine? I'm very excited today to let you know about a well-done prospective study at the Cleveland Clinic Health System in Ohio in the United States. It's important to note that there was no conflict of interest with any of the authors and that no funding was received for the study. It was clear to me that the study was performed so the Cleveland Clinic could decide if it was appropriate to make vaccines mandatory for its staff, especially staff that had already had COVID. So basically, the study provides information to people who have had COVID in terms of whether they should get vaccinated. They conducted a longitudinal study to see if their healthcare workers who had COVID and had not taken the vaccine had a higher chance of contracting it, again, compared to people who had not had COVID but had been vaccinated. Essentially, they are comparing vaccinated immunity to natural immunity, which is the big question. As always, there's a link to the study in the description right below. As I mentioned previously many months ago, infective people should at least go to the back of the line getting a vaccine. But the more important question is, should they be vaccinated at all? The CDC in the US recommends that people who have been previously infected still get the vaccine. The reason provided is that it's safer to get vaccinated than to get the disease, which is certainly true, but that's not an explanation for why people who have had the disease need to be vaccinated. On to this study itself. All employees of the Cleveland Clinic Health System who were in employment December 16, 2020 were included in the study. There were 52,238 employees at the time. Note that these employees are primarily frontline healthcare workers. December 16, 2020 was when the vaccination started. Vaccinations were given with either the Pfizer vaccine in 37% of people or the Moderna vaccine in 63% of people. The cumulative incidence of COVID infection over the next 5 months among previously infected subjects who received the vaccine was compared with those of previously infected subjects who remained unvaccinated. Previously infected subjects who received the vaccine, as well as previously uninfected subjects who remained unvaccinated. Now here's the results. Of people who did not have previous COVID-19 infection, 59% got vaccinated and 41% did not. Again, note that these are healthcare professionals on the front lines. Over the 5 months, there were 2,154 COVID-19 infections in the groups. Now, 2,139, which is 99.3% of the infections, actually occurred among people who were not previously infected and who remained unvaccinated. There were 15 infections in people who were not previously infected and who were vaccinated. None, I repeat, none of the 2,579 previously infected subjects, including the 1,359 who remained unvaccinated, did not get infected. So that means no person in that group of 1,359 people who had been previously infected and chose not to get a vaccine, none of those people developed infection over the 5 months of the study. So the important thing to note is that in people who were previously infected, the average time that they were infected was about 5 months before December 16. And of course, there was follow-up another 5 months after. So it suggests that there's at least 10 months of protection here in this group of participants. The duration of natural protective immunity is not known, but of course the same can be said about the duration of vaccine protective immunity. Their study does provide direct evidence that vaccination with the best available vaccines did not provide additional protection in previously infected individuals. Of course, it's not known how well the results would be if there were newer variants. However, if prior infection does not afford protection against these new variants, there's little reason to think that the currently available vaccines would either.
So here we have, this is a graph from the site here, seroprevalence study over time. So I think you can probably see that. That's 100% there. That's 50%, 25%, 75%. And we can see that by January, February, that's about March. And in fact, this data here is from about the 21st of March, 2021. And we can see there that the seroprevalence is getting towards the 50% mark. That's the 50% mark there. So pretty high seroprevalence as of the 21st of March. And to give the precise figures we have here, seroprevalence was actually 49.1% on the 21st of March. So this is some time ago when this data has been collated from. Now, this is the interesting bit. On the 21st of March, pretty well 50%, 49.1% of people, and this is for the whole United States, 49.1% were seroprevalent. But at that time, vaccinations were only 13.7%. So we can see that the majority of the seroprevalence in the United States was from natural infection. So United States was natural immunity key. It's looking like, at least as the 21st of March, it was a much bigger chunk than vaccination was. And this is surprising. It is surprising, but it's interesting. So the United States, it looks like, was well on the way to what we might call herd immunity before the vaccination program really got going.